So we've learned about the structure of the income statement and how all companies use the same exact structure. But sometimes companies will use different terminology for the individual line items. So we're going to compare the line items for 5 different companies. And then I'll show you how to do a simple analysis that can unlock some very powerful insights. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to understand the operations of a company just by looking at the income statement. Let's start by taking a look at 5 very different companies: Amazon, American Airlines, Berkshire Hathaway, FedEx, and Kroger. Starting with the top line, remember Apple called this net sales. Amazon also calls it net sales. American Airlines calls it operating revenues. Berkshire Hathaway calls it revenue. FedEx calls it revenues as well, and Kroger simply calls it sales. The next line down, cost of sales, is used at Amazon and merchandise cost at Kroger. But notice how the other companies don't even have a line item for this. They simply lump it into the next line item. Operating expenses is pretty uniform across the companies, except for Berkshire Hathaway that calls it costs and expenses. On the next line, we have operating income for Amazon, American Airlines, and FedEx, earnings before taxes for Berkshire, and operating profit for Kroger. The bottom line is net income or net earnings all the way across the board. As you can see, it's always the same structure with slightly different labeling, so don't let that confuse you. Okay, now that you know how to read an income statement, I'm going to push you one step further and show you how to do some basic analysis. The analysis is where you really start to understand how well a company is doing and why. Now don't be scared, all we're going to do is a little grade school math. Now, when I get my hands on an income statement, the very first thing I do is convert every line item into a percentage of sales. So you simply create a new column and divide every number by net sales, the very top line. So what that allows you to do is visualize the income statement as a funnel with the revenue going in the top and the profit coming out the bottom. Now take a look at what Apple's income statement looks like as a funnel. For every $1 that goes in the top from revenue, about 62 cents is spent on ingredients. That's the cost of sales divided by net sales. About 12 cents is spent on operations or overhead. That's total operating expenses divided by net sales. And about 4 cents is spent on taxes and other things. So that 4% is made up of 5% for taxes and offset by about 1% positive for other income, which leaves about 22 cents dropping out the bottom of the funnel as profit, which is net income divided by net sales. Now we can take that 22 cents and invest it back into the business, or we can distribute it to the owners, also known as the shareholders. Once you have this funnel, you can compare it to the competition. For example, let's compare Apple to its main competitor, Samsung. Because Samsung is not traded on the US stock exchanges, we actually have to go to the Samsung website, find the investor relations section, and download the annual report for 2018. It looks like Apple spends quite a bit more on ingredients than Samsung. There could be a number of reasons for that. One reason might be that Apple's products are more premium and they use more expensive ingredients, but Samsung also has a wider range of products, from TVs to home appliances. So the product mix might be causing this difference. And when it comes to operating expenses, Apple spends about half of what Samsung does. We might infer from this that Tim Cook and his management team at Apple are doing a great job at running the business efficiently. And looking down at the profit that drops out the bottom of the funnel, Apple is generating more profit per dollar of revenue than Samsung. So if I were employed by either of these businesses, I'd want to dig in and understand what's driving these differences. Is it that each company made different accounting decisions, or are there some real-world factors that we can identify? So the next thing I like to do when I get my hands on an income statement is to calculate the change over time of revenue, gross margin, operating income, and net income. It helps me spot where there might be some positive things or where there could be some trouble, or at least some warning signs. On sec.gov, you can download the income statement for each of the previous years. Remember that the annual reports are called 10Ks and the quarterly reports are called 10Qs. We're using the 10K reports. Here I created a table with each year along the top as columns, and along the side we have each of the line items we care about. At the bottom we have each of the same line items, but this time we're calculating the percentage change over time over the course of the year. The math for this is easy. Let's take a look at the change in revenue from 2014 to 2015. It's 27.9%. And we get that by taking 2015 revenue divided by 2014 revenue and then subtract 1. So in this case, the 2015 revenue is $233,715 million divided by the 2014 revenue of $182,795 million, and then you subtract 1. So you do the same calculation for the percentage change for each year and for each line item to fill in the rest of this box. Now let's see if anything else stands out. Well, 2015 looks like a pretty good year all the way around. There was a 27.9% increase in revenue. So what might have caused that? Well, knowing Apple, my guess would be new product launches that did very well. And it looks like there was an even stronger gain in net profit. This is telling us that in 2015, Apple not only did a great job growing sales, but their expenses for ingredients grew slower than revenue. There are many ways this could happen. For example, maybe they were able to raise prices while keeping their costs the same, or maybe they found ways to make iPhones more cheaply. Or maybe more of their revenue is coming from high-margin products like the App Store, which has a low cost of sales. We can also see the operating income grew faster than revenue. This typically means that management did a great job running the business efficiently and keeping those overhead costs low, even as they were growing the business. Now, 2016 looks like a totally different story. Apple had a 7.7% decline in net sales, and net income declined at an even higher rate. We should immediately ask the question, what happened in 2016? And moving on to 2017, it looks like Apple is starting to recover, and by 2018, it looks pretty strong again. Okay, so there's one final analysis I like to do. Remember when we turned that income statement into a funnel? Well, we can make that same funnel for every year in order to spot any changes in the shape of that funnel. Now, we already discussed our 2018 funnel. We have a gross margin of $101,839 million. Divide that by net sales of $265,595 million to get 38.3%. We have operating income of $70,898 million. Divide that by net sales to get 26.7%. And finally, we have net income of $59,531 million divided by net sales to get 22.4%. And after we do that same calculation for every year, we can look for trends. For example, it looks like gross margin is declining from 2015 to 2018. Now we have a focus for where to direct our attention. We can form a hypothesis and then go try to validate it. One hypothesis could be that Apple has competitors that are putting downward pressure on iPhone pricing. Another possibility is that suppliers are charging more for their ingredients. And these are things that we can now go research, but we wouldn't have known what to look for without first identifying these trends in the income statements. While a single income statement can give you insight into how well a company was operating over a certain period of time, you can see the power of looking at trends over the course of several time periods to put things into context. And you can also compare those trends to competitors. As you can see, these analyses are actually very simple to calculate, and they'll allow you to answer some very key questions. How profitable is the business, and is that changing over time? What's driving the growth or decline in sales and profits? How does the company compare to its competitors? What questions would you ask the CEO? Congratulations, you now know how to read and analyze the income statement.
So imagine you're a small business owner. What should you focus on? Or if you're an entrepreneur and you're evaluating a couple of different business opportunities, a couple things that you want to be on the lookout for. Obviously, market opportunity and growth. Secondly, is something that ultimately has the potential to be a high margin business. And what do I mean by high margin? High margin means that your revenue minus your cost of goods sold minus your fixed cost of doing business gives you an operating profit that as a percentage of your revenues is an attractive percentage. So one could have a really low margin business of 1%, $1 for every $100 that you make. You're gonna have to sell 100 units to get to $100 million. as opposed to a high margin business. Let's say for every $100 that you sell, you could make $30 in operating profit. You're only going to have to sell 3 1/3 to make that same 100. So looking for high margin opportunity is important. Secondly is don't run out of cash. Always focus on cash. And revenue and operating income and net income don't necessarily reflect what your cash position is. So keep your foot on the gas and keep looking for cash.
If I'm looking at 5 companies in the same industry, I'm going to line them up. First of all, I'm going to look at historical performance over 3 or 4 years, so I can make sure there's nothing cyclical going on and I can discern whether or not the company is growing or declining. I'm going to want to look at top line growth and then at operating margin. Well, 3 things really. Your top line growth, because that's indicative fundamentally of the health of the business. And ideally what you'd want, frankly, is all 5 of those companies to have strong top line growth, because that means there's underlying growth in the industry and they're not killing each other to get market share. The next thing I would look at is gross margin, because you're going to want to see that they are fundamentally selling stuff at a good profit, and that should be hopefully increasing so you don't have a compression of your price relative to what it costs to produce the product. And here you'll probably start to see some differentiation among the companies, because those that have the best product should command a little bit of a price premium and therefore should have a slightly higher margin there. You'll also get an indication of how effective their production capability is. And then the third big metric I would look at is that operating margin at the bottom line. A company that is growing at the top line and doing efficiently is going to see an increasing operating margin because it's able to keep its fixed cost base under control. And I remember one of my cases at Harvard Business School. We read a lot of cases at Harvard Business School. One of the lines I remember was from a French company, Schlumberger, which is a measurement and instrument company. They make oscilloscopes and stuff like that. And the CEO of that company had said, growth covered a magnitude of sins, which is a fancy way of saying they had a lot of runaway cost growth that they were getting away with because their top line was growing so much. So you sort of have to dig into all 3 of these things.
So let's do a quick recap of what we just learned. An income statement shows the amount of sales, expenses, and profits flowing through a business during a given period of time. It's structured the same way for any business, with the exception of some variation in the names of a few line items. You can convert the income statement line items into percentages of sales or revenue to understand the economics of the business and what's driving the profits and losses. And you can calculate the growth rates between periods in sales and profits to understand how things changed over time. You can do this analysis for any business, whether or not you know the industry or the company, and we can generally understand what's happening.